How have Britain's top drug companies promoted their wares to doctors?
So I say, well, look, I'll give you a cheque for £50 or £100 or whatever, and I would like you to give me a receipt on surgery-headed notepaper, just saying that you've received for lunch meetings, you know, the sum of £50 or £100.
First Tuesday reveals how drug companies sweeten the medicine. Tuesday at 10:40 on Granada. This is Granada. Now we join Alistair Burnett and Fiona Armstrong at ITN for the news at 10.
Mrs. Thatcher, reassured, is contemptuous of the Heseltine threat. The Gulf, the Americans are calling up more reservists. Europe is still divided on cutting farm subsidies. The Third World says it can't afford to stop global warming. And the unions say schools are 10,000 teachers short in England. Good evening. Mrs. Thatcher left for Europe and an environment conference tonight, apparently confident that she can see off her critics in the Conservative Party and outside. At lunch with senior colleagues in Downing Street, she talked about policies for 10 more years of Conservative government. She was said to be resolute and relishing a fight. The Foreign Secretary, Mr. Hurd, told the CBI in Glasgow that Britain had to make a success of its place inside Europe. We must continue to fight our corner, he said, without frightening ourselves with ogres. That was taken to be a caution to the Prime Minister.
Mrs. Thatcher is in Geneva tonight for a big environmental conference. Before leaving, though, she made it clear that she's ready for any fight, from Europe, from the opposition, or from within her own ranks. She's dismissing Michael Heseltine's weekend intervention, quote, with contempt and disdain, confident that she has the overwhelming support of the Tory party. She'll soon know, in a tough week ahead. On Wednesday, in the debate following the Queen's speech, Mrs. Thatcher must reply to a full-scale attack by Mr. Kinnock. On Thursday, in his autumn statement, the Chancellor will announce public spending for next year of over £200 billion, but the opposition will still attack the government's economic record. On Friday morning, there could be bad news with the Bradford North and Bootle by-election results. The Tories risk coming third in both. And also on Friday, with the House debating foreign affairs, Sir Geoffrey Howe may outline his reasons for resigning. Today at Downing Street, though, an upbeat mood. The party chairman, Kenneth Baker, called in for his weekly meeting, and later others arrived, including, surprisingly, Lord Whitelaw, for a wide-ranging strategy session over lunch. Mrs. Thatcher's sights, we were told later, were set far beyond the present problems besetting her on all sides. The new leader of the House, John McGregor, was at the lunch too.
Well, what are the problems on all sides? There's been all this talk of crisis and contest over the weekend, put in terms of personalities. If you actually look at the policy issues, and I noticed that that's what Mr. Heseltine asked us to concentrate on, I think there's great agreement by and large in the party. You will always, on any issue, get one or two people who don't agree, but there's great agreement in the party, and I believe that that will be very clear in the Queen's speech debate.
But in sharp contrast to the rather defiant mood in and around Downing Street, a measured and very diplomatic speech from the Foreign Secretary to the CBI in Glasgow. Government and party were united on the European policies which, quote, the Prime Minister and the rest of us have agreed. He and the Chancellor would be taking a quiverful of ideas to the forthcoming conferences on monetary and political union.
We have to continue to fight our corner for British interests. We do that. It is right to do that. It requires combat. But we can do that without frightening ourselves with ogres.
To those who reckon that it's Mrs. Thatcher who's been raising the European ogres recently, that sounded like a carefully coded warning, though Number 10 said they had no problems with the speech and had seen it in advance. Mr. Hurd continued.
We have to make a success of Britain in Europe. I'm quite clear that our younger generation requires this. I'm clear from what you and many others have said that the best of our business community require it, and some of us have spent too long on this cause to let it founder.
As a whole, the speech certainly laid down a marker against Mr. Heseltine, one-time Defence Secretary in Israel today, and getting a reminder from their Defence Minister about comebacks.
Well, there's life after the Defence Minister, right?
Well, you can come back.
But as to his weekend intervention...
It's much better for me to see what everyone is saying, what the newspapers are saying, then I can make a comment if I feel necessary, but it's not necessary to do it now.
A sign there, perhaps, that Mr. Heseltine, who later met the Israeli Prime Minister, may be worried that he went too far at the weekend. Public support so far has been minimal. He'll need to do some repair work when he gets back home. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Westminster.
Reports from the Pentagon say America is to boost its combat forces in the Gulf with part-time soldiers. U.S. Secretary of State James Baker, who's in the Gulf, says while he's still working for peace, America must consider other options. European community ministers have been meeting in Rome tonight to discuss the fate of hostages held by Iraq and the efforts to free them. The former West German Chancellor Willy Brandt arrived in Baghdad tonight. He's hoping to get more released.
Mr. Baker is said to be bringing with him possible timetables for military action against Iraq, and no one is more anxious to see that implemented than Kuwait's government in exile in Taif. The Kuwaitis promised further funding for the multinational force, a raid against Iraq, but the Emir told Mr. Baker he wanted his country liberated today and not tomorrow. It was as he left for Jeddah and his meetings with the Saudis that Mr. Baker cranked up the pressure on Baghdad, warning the crisis had reached a new stage.
This crisis is entering a new phase, and while we're still seeking a peaceful political and diplomatic solution, we have to, I think, put ourselves in a position where we would be able to exercise any options that might be available. At the same time, I don't think that we can, nor should we, rule out a resort to force if that should be necessary. Our strong preference would be a political and peaceful solution.
Waiting for his Secretary of State in Jeddah, Commander of the U.S. Forces, General Schwarzkopf. He'll be anxious to see Mr. Baker settle on a new Allied command structure that will leave him in operational control of the entire multinational force. Tonight, at a working dinner with Foreign Minister Prince Saud, Mr. Baker is expected to explore not just the timetable, but also the political and human cost of war. And with King Fahd, Mr. Baker will formally ask permission to send a further 100,000 American troops to Saudi Arabia in preparation for what he will warn could well prove a protracted conflict. Peter Sharp, News at 10 in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
Tonight's emergency EC meeting in Rome was called to reassert unity over Saddam's hostages. The fact that it had to be called reflects the divisions which have strained the community over the past 10 days. The Germans wanted it. Their foreign minister, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, telephoned his Italian counterpart this morning. It is confusion in Bonn that made it necessary. Confusion over the visit to Baghdad by the former West German Chancellor Willy Brandt. He arrived there this evening, greeted by the Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz, and the Iraqis have dropped broad hints that, like Edward Heath, he will be rewarded with hostage releases. The German government, which faces a general election within a month, fears that if that happens, it'll benefit Mr. Brandt's party at home, and they haven't been willing to criticize his efforts. That despite the fact that the European summit in Rome 8 days ago decided that all community governments should try to discourage unilateral missions to Baghdad to free hostages. The community's leaders agreed that such missions might send the wrong message to Saddam Hussein. Now community members are trying to repair any damage to that joint strategy that the Brandt affair may have done. An Iraqi television broadcast tonight provided a reminder that Baghdad is all too well aware of the public opinion capital to be made from its hostages. A group of British men paraded for the cameras.
And how do you look at the visits paid by some prominent figures, prominent figures coming here to Iraq?
I'm pleased to see that some politicians have shown some initiative and taken guests on with them.
While at home, the wives of two men held by the Iraqis announced their plans to go to Baghdad to seek freedom for their husbands.
We would not like to undermine our government, and we have no intention of going there as politicians or diplomats. So hopefully we would be accepted as what we are, wives of hostages.
With individual cases like this constantly in the public eye, the pressure on Western governments over the hostage issue will go on, despite the renewed display of unity by EC foreign ministers tonight.
The European farm ministers, who've been talking all day in Brussels to try to agree to cuts in farm subsidies, are expected to end their meeting in the next hour. They'll resume again tomorrow. It's the 7th time they've tried to reach a deal.
In Brussels today, no criticisms of Britain's role in the community. For on reforming agriculture, Britain is leading the way, pulling the reluctant French and Germans towards a deal. Intense interest is focusing on the outcome of these talks. For if a compromise can be reached to cut subsidies to Europe's farmers, the way is also open for a deal to be struck, liberalising world trade. Behind the laughter, ministers concede this is a make-or-break summit. 7 times they've struggled to resolve this issue, and 7 times they have failed. With time running out, the risks of the world dividing into rival trading blocs is now acute. Britain is also busy defending its community credentials.
In the community, we are recognised as a very communitaire country which sticks by its promises. We are known to be difficult when it comes to negotiation because we've got a lot to offer. When we've agreed, we stick by our agreement. That makes us very powerful in these negotiations.
If we don't agree today, it is very seriously damaging to our credibility. It is also making it ever more difficult to get a successful outcome.
Robert Moore, News at 10, Brussels.
The Employment Secretary, Mr. Michael Howard, told the heads of British industry today to make training part of their business plans, as they would any other investment. He was using the CBI conference to launch a scheme called Investors in People. Nearly 40% of British school leavers have A-levels, degrees or craft qualifications. In Germany, 90% have such qualifications.
Michael Howard believes a skills revolution is underway in this country. Today, as well as learning the art of aiming straight at a CBI trade stand, he announced a new industry standard for training schemes, what he calls a badge of distinction.
It's been extremely well received. We've got the full cooperation of the CBI, and I think it's going to mark another step forward in changing the attitudes of employers in this country.
But some here at the CBI feel there's insufficient substance behind the presentational gloss of government-funded training. This includes new training and enterprise councils known as TECs, where the private sector takes over state schemes.
Government can always do more, can't it? Could do more with resources, I think, particularly to the emerging techs.
I think we've got a long way to go yet, and I'm still wondering whether everybody is as committed to training as we need to be for the future.
And this is the sort of commitment they may be looking for, the German model, which has been running for years. Here at the chemical giant Bayer, there are 4,500 apprentices, twice the number of trainees at ICI, a comparable British company. They're trained for 3 years, here learning from models demonstrating chemical processes. And at the end of the apprenticeship, there's no commitment to stay. They can leave with a nationally recognised chemical industry qualification. Bayer's apprentices, like all others in German companies, spend a day and a half a week in the classroom. There's a curriculum leading to an exam which is coordinated by the government.
If you want to produce good and high-quality products, you need qualified people. And on one hand, you get qualified people from the university levels. On the other hand, you need, between unskilled and university level, you need skilled workers.
These young men are the skilled workers of the future who will sustain Germany's domination in world markets, the product of a long-standing training partnership between government and industry. No new initiatives needed here. These are the standards which have been set by our major European competitor. Employers here know that we are badly behind in many areas, and in some respects the skills revolution hasn't yet begun. Hugh Pym, News at 10, at the CBI conference in Glasgow.
The environmentalists, Mrs. Thatcher among them, who fear global warming, want to stop it. But the third world insists it can't afford to help. A report next. Plus, the Red Army says to dissidents, watch it or there'll be military law. And what else goes down in the BSB failure? That's in a couple of minutes.
We're asking these people who've already shaved this morning to try the revolutionary new Brawn Flex Control.
It feels quite good, actually. It feels like it's cutting more off.
We wanted to see how the new pivoting head and twin foils followed the contours of his face for a really close shave.
I can tell where it cuts and where it doesn't need to cut anymore. Thanks, that feels good. Really good. Can I take it?
Then we checked what his other shaver had missed.
Feels good. I like it.
Once you try it, we think you'll agree you haven't shaved till you shave with a Brawn.
No matter how life goes,
with all its joys and woes. I never feel in a jam. I guess I'm just an amicable man. That's right. Got no worries financially. Got a pension and policy.
With a pension from Scottish Amicable, you won't have to worry. Whatever life throws at you. Scottish Amicable. Pensions, life assurance, endowments.
New Lego Airport. The fun just keeps building.
Confidently, casually, precariously, hopefully, lovingly, smoothly, creamily, uniquely, deadly.
So, we're doing well, but we're no doing great. What this company needs is some...
Excuse me for interrupting. You mean...
That's the fella!
The Enterprise Initiative could help your business. Take it before your competitors do. Phone 0800 500 200 for more information.
Mrs. Thatcher is in Geneva to speak at the Second World Climate Conference on the greenhouse effect and global warming. Britain plans to peg carbon dioxide emissions at today's levels by the year 2005, 5 years behind the rest of the EC, and the Prime Minister is expected to call on the 100 nations in Geneva to be realistic about what they can do. They'll be asked to sign a declaration which says that global warming poses a threat of a magnitude the world has never known before.
What is vital is that as many people as possible sign up to making a success of the negotiations which will begin in earnest in February to give us a global, a world agreement by 1992 on climate change. We know the issues that we're talking about are of vital concern to all of us. And what we need as soon as possible is to have everybody signed up to taking precautions.
The United States and Third World countries are resisting setting target dates for cutting greenhouse gas emissions. America now accounts for about 23% of the world's carbon dioxide, the Soviet Union 16%, Europe about 14%, and the big developing countries India and China 14%. In the next century, India and China's contribution could rise up to 25%. ITN's environment correspondent Justin Jones reports from India on how the government there is trying to reconcile protecting the environment with economic growth.
India's population is growing at a rate of 20 million people a year. By the end of the century, it'll be 1 billion, and they will all need energy. The woodyard has traditionally provided the people with their fuel to heat their homes and cook their food. But India can no longer rely on wood to drive its developing economy. Its people and its industry want commercially generated electricity. A huge expansion of coal-fired power stations like these in Delhi is planned to meet rising demand. But they're the major source of carbon dioxide, the main gas that causes global warming.
In the next decade or so, I foresee a doubling of energy consumption. Now, most of this would be commercial energy. At least the increases would come from commercial energy, with coal contributing the largest amount.
Traffic pollution is the other rapidly increasing source of carbon dioxide. In most developing countries, traditional transport is giving way to the car. And in India, there are an extra 1 million vehicles on the road every year. The government here is taking some action to cut down on traffic pollution, Motorists have to take their cars in for regular checks. And cleaner alternative sources of energy, including wind and solar power, are being developed. But the government argues it's the West which must provide more money and advanced technology to clean up. Maneka Gandhi, the former environment minister, warns India will not stop developing just because the West is worried about global warming.
At no point now, and let the West understand this, can they say, right, cut down your CO2. Because nobody is going to listen to them, because the knee-jerk reaction is, well, they've reached a point of excess, and now they're having destroyed the whole world. Want us to remain poor. It's just another form of imperialism. We won't do it.
Unlike Europe, India has no mass green movement to pressurize its government to force change. They haven't even heard of global warming here, but if the scientists advising world leaders at tomorrow's conference are right, then vast areas of farmland in India and other developing countries will turn to desert, and the millions already suffering malnutrition face famine. Justin Jones, News at 10, Delhi.
In the Soviet Union, a group of army officers says that the KGB and army hardliners may be planning a coup and martial law after the Revolution Day parades later this week. This report by David Smith of ITN's Channel 4 News.
The Turmansk Regiment on exercise in the countryside east of Moscow. This is one of the elite units of the Red Army, and every generation that trains here is steeped in a tradition that dates back to the October Revolution. To defend the motherland, to defend socialism. Yet today this army is under attack. The economists say the military spend too much. The politicians believe the army's a danger to democracy. What is the army saying to the politicians right now?
Нет, сейчас армия пока советов не дает. Армия вынуждена защищаться от тех политических предложений, которые, к сожалению, на сегодняшний день есть. Никогда не было такой критики в адрес вооруженных сил, которая сейчас у нас вот развита в стране. Мы, конечно, против этого. Вооруженные силы незаслуженно обижают в этом плане.
The army must reflect the nation, mirror the people. That was Stalin's edict. And if you look at the makeup of the military today, it still holds true. Conscripts do come from every sector of society, representing every nationality. Yet increasingly the army's out of step with the country, unable to accept that after the withdrawal from Eastern Europe it cannot have the same role. And do you think the army should have any role in politics?
Ну, конечно, армия всегда во все времена играла политическую роль в жизни всех государств, и ее роль со временем никогда не изменится.
Hundreds of officers have now formed a radical movement within the army. It's called SHIELD. At their meetings, they warn of a coup unless the military establishment is purged. The leader is Colonel Vitaly Ureshchev, once an advisor to the defense minister.
Событие уже началось. Мы получили информацию в Союз Щит, что состоялось совещание военных работников КГБ достаточно высокого уровня.
Whether the generals are plotting this week, we don't know. But the Red Army today is divided and confused, resenting its loss of status and struggling to find a new identity. And it's a sign of the tension felt now that the most senior figures need to say publicly the army's behind Gorbachev. Is the army, in your view, a threat to democracy?
По-моему, нет. Наша армия, советские вооруженные силы, являются гарантом демократии, а не угрозой демократии.
Whatever the generals say, the army remains the ultimate arbiter of power here. And the great unknown is not so much a coup, but what they'll do if and when President Gorbachev calls on them to put down the unrest so many expect this winter. David Smith, ITN, Moscow.
Here, the number of unfilled teaching jobs in England and Wales has reached 10,000, according to the 6 teaching unions. That's well above government figures. The new Education Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, described the survey as unreliable. He said it was ludicrous that posts filled by temporary appointments had been counted as vacancies.
According to the government, Aveley School in Essex is short of 2 out of its complement of 12 teachers. According to the unions, it's down by 4. The discrepancy arises because the government excludes posts filled by supply or temporary teachers. But however it's measured, the headmaster here says he has a serious problem.
It does in fact mean that we cannot in any shape or form meet the demands of the national curriculum, and it ends up that we're really occupying the children during the day rather than giving them a sufficient education.
This term, some classes which were meant to have less than 30 pupils have had to be doubled up to 60 because of staff shortages. Nationally, however, the government says the figure is dropping. In September 1989, there were 2,590 vacancies. This autumn, in a telephone survey, they found there were just 1,400. The teaching union's figure of 8,000 last year was already much above the government's, and this year they say it's even worse, at nearly 10,000.
It shows that the position is worse than it was a year ago, which contradicts the DES's own findings. And that's not surprising because they really fixed the figures by changing their definition of a vacancy. But it also shows that, as with last year, the spread of vacancies is throughout England and Wales.
They've made a number of assumptions about what is a vacancy and what isn't a vacancy, which we wouldn't accept. The important thing is that the union should stop scaremongering, and they should work with us to improve the status of the profession, the attraction of the profession.
The worrying thing about today's survey is not so much the overall figure, but the fact that it suggests that the trend in teacher vacancies is still upward. The unions say unless there's a big increase in their pay this year, that trend will continue to rise. Libby Wiener, News at 10 at the Department of Education.
The Office of Fair Trading says it will probably examine the merger between Britain's two satellite television stations, Sky and BSB. The Independent Broadcasting Authority, the regulatory authority for the BSB part of the merger, said today it was not up to BSB to alter the terms of its broadcasting contract. That, it said, was the IBA's decision.
The IBA's anger tonight derives largely from BSB not seeking its permission before the merger. But there's also a crucial technical issue at stake. It's high-definition television. In Japan, the NHK station is already broadcasting high-definition pictures for an hour a day to special sets in Tokyo shopping centres. And Sony will be selling domestic sets at £16,000 in Japan before Christmas. Television makers the world over are bitterly fighting for a slice of what they all agree is the future of TV. The European community has spent £200 million on research.
We can't show you what high definition would look like because you don't have a high definition TV set. But imagine the picture you're watching now is high definition, with 1,250 lines. Then, by comparison, this is how bad today's conventional pictures, with 625 lines, would look.
American and European companies are developing their own versions of high definition. In Europe, that's based on a technical standard called MAC. BSB was the first broadcaster to use MAC and made much of the fact, even though the satellite station's launch was delayed while the technology was perfected. But now the merger with Rupert Murdoch's Sky probably means broadcasting only via Sky's satellite, and that could mean the end of Europe's high definition.
I think it's finished. Really, realistically, it's finished because the European system for high-definition television builds on the MAC system. Without MAC, there isn't going to be any high-definition MAC, obviously. So the best that we can hope for is perhaps that there will be a high-definition widescreen version of the current bog-standard PAL that everyone is using, like this transmission.
Improved PAL pictures won't be as good as high definition, and crucially, will still leave the door open to cheaper imports from the Far East that could threaten the European television industry.
And the main news again, Mrs. Thatcher has dismissed Mr. Michael Heseltine's weekend letter with disdain and contempt. She's said to be resolute and ready for a fight, and the United States is reported to be calling up reservists to send to the Gulf.
And that's the news at 10 tonight. Good night.
Hello, good evening. Well, it's been good Guy Fawkes weather over most of the country. Cool and crisp, clear too, so at least we could see those fireworks as well as hear them all going off. In fact, this time of the year, clear nights do invariably mean cold ones. So if you were lucky enough to be huddled around a bonfire, then I expect you felt the warmth of the flames more than welcome. Hang on to your thickest overcoat if you're out and about tonight too, because with no wind around it will be cold. Although dry and clear, fog slicing the middle of the country, and perhaps just the odd shower troubling the eastern coast. A cold night, as I say. Look at these temperatures, under freezing point in many places, and a widespread frost as well. So as we go into tomorrow, it's very much a misty, murky sort of a note, and that's because of all the smoke in the atmosphere from the bonfires and fireworks. So that fog will linger on too, very patchy, and perhaps just the odd shower in the east. As the day wears on, that fog will more or less burn off, and the showers will stop, although some places will still end the day on a rather grey, miserable note. These are the sorts of temperatures we can expect between 7 and 10, so struggling to get up into double figures. But of course, with those winds still fairly light, a cold day in the offing. That's all from me. I'll leave you, of course, with tomorrow's sunset times and the summary. Good night.
It's music to the ears for entertainment this Tuesday evening here on Granada, taking off with a flying start. Anthony Wilson referees another battle of the entrepreneurs competing for a prize of £40,000, and they all mean business. Playing it mean, Diaz Roach takes on a drunk who's out to lunch.
I have called the police. I am the police.
Why didn't Roach accompany his prisoner?
He was with a lady, sir. If Roach is in trouble, he's only got himself to blame.
May the force be with you. At 8:30, Barrymore speaks the lingo.
Jalel.
All right there, Ed. Okay. There you go. A tap dancing.
He'll go down well. At 9, the urban cowboy rides out.
Mr. Boone has been muddying the waters. The man's digging and I want to stop.
What is it you're studying then, Geraldine? How to frighten defenceless old people?
A fistful of clues. And that's Tuesday evening's entertainment on Granada.
This is Granada. Hello, now the latest news from the northwest. Thousands of jobs in the construction industry in the region are at risk because of recession. The Northwest branch of the Building Employers Confederation has reported that 65% of its members expect their workforces to be cut in the next 3 months. It says the region is suffering from a downturn in the industry, which began in the southeast, and there's no prospect of early recovery. The Confederation's national chairman, David Woods, of the Salford-based Fernley Group, describes the crisis as the worst for 10 years. A development package to save and create hundreds of jobs in Lancashire has been announced. The package, which is worth £4.5 million, was put together by Hyndburn Borough Council and Lancashire Enterprise, the development agency. The money will be spent on the construction of industrial units, improvement of old property, and a training programme for people who've been out of work for a long time. The bus services in the Wrexham area have been disrupted tonight after 120 Crosville Wales bus drivers were sacked for taking unofficial strike action. The drivers refused to return to work in a row over pay and conditions. Meanwhile, a dispute which halted bus services in Blackpool for 4 days has been settled. The strike also stopped the seafront trams on the final weekend of the illuminations. Both buses and trams will be back to normal tomorrow, but the illuminations won't. They finish tonight. Rail travellers have been facing continuing problems on the 12th day of the guards dispute at Piccadilly Station in Manchester. Commuters travelling from the south of the city were frustrated by further delays and cancellations. Some intercity services to London were cancelled. British Rail said there's no end in sight to the Guards' industrial action over new rosters, although they hope negotiations will be resumed soon. Talks to resolve a postal dispute in Lancashire have broken down. 60 postal workers in Chorley went on unofficial strike this morning. They were refusing to handle an extremely high volume of mail. A post office spokesman said there will be no deliveries tomorrow morning. Well, local councils and residents are preparing to fight the proposed privatisation of Manchester Airport. It's been reported that the government may force councils to sell off airports like Manchester to improve efficiency. Andy Gill reports.
Supporters of privatisation say it would make airports owned by local councils more efficient. Opponents say an airport like Manchester, which last year made £44 million profit, is efficient enough. Profits are either put back into the airport or go to the 10 councils who own it. In Manchester, the council estimated it would mean £15 on everyone's poll tax if that revenue was lost.
The airport was built and paid for by ratepayers. It's their asset, and I shall seek to retain it for them.
On balance, I'm in favour. I wouldn't like to see the land and buildings taken away from the councils, though. I'd like to see them get a nice, handsome profit rental, but I'd like to see the airport run by a private enterprise, yes.
Officials at the airport reject claims that Manchester is one of the most expensive in the country and that they've spurned private investment. Tonight, the Transport Department said it's yet to reach any conclusions in its review of the future of airports owned by local councils.
Hundreds of jobs at the Camel Laird shipyard in Birkenhead may be saved after intervention by the European Commission. Wallasey MP Linda Chalker says the Commission has cleared the way for the sale of the yard, which is threatened with closure soon unless a buyer is found. But European Commissioner Leon Britton told her there'll be no cash aid from Brussels for the yard, which is on the market because it's got no new orders. 160 people have been charged with a variety of offences, including the possession of drugs, following an acid house party near Bolton yesterday. The revellers forced their way into West Horton Market Hall. Police who moved in were met with a barrage of missiles, including lighted fireworks. One policeman was taken to hospital with a gashed head after violent struggles outside, and a police van was damaged. The Home Office is investigating the death of a prisoner at Walton Prison in Liverpool. 28-year-old Anthony Renton was found hanging in the hospital wing. He was serving a life sentence for murder. It's the second death at the prison within 6 weeks. The police are investigating the cause of a house fire in Blackpool, in which a woman died. Firemen were called to a house in Kent Road after reports that the kitchen was on fire. The fire was out when they arrived, but they found the body of June Croft inside the house. England football manager Graham Taylor has been in the Northwest campaigning for better safety on the roads. A third of all those killed in drink-related accidents are aged under 25. He had a warning for drivers when he launched a play aimed at children in Preston called Too Much Punch for Judy.
Do you really realise that if you do have a drink and you do get into any kind of vehicle and you've had too much to drink, not only are you running the risk of killing yourself, you're also running the risk of killing other people. And you'll never think it happens to you, but it does. It does happen to you.
Football, and there's increased speculation Manchester United may be about to go public. Chairman Martin Edwards said during the summer he'd agreed to sell his controlling interest, but the club announced today that the planned deal had fallen through. A number of alternative options are being considered. The two elderly people from the Northwest have received recognition for their outstanding work in the community. The Princess of Wales presented the Help the Aged Golden Awards at a ceremony in London. Robin Wickstead from Liverpool received a special caring award for her continuing efforts to improve the lives of elderly and mentally ill people. And Benjamin Swift from Manchester received the Outstanding Service to the Community Award. Well, finally, the weather. Clear and dry tonight with some frost in places around dawn. Minimum temperature 1 degree centigrade, which is 34 Fahrenheit. Low cloud and mist clearing tomorrow with some sunshine, although winds will be fresh. Maximum temperature 10 centigrade or 50 Fahrenheit. Well, now Hazel Barrett has a few words to say about tomorrow's edition of Granada Tonight.
No, I love cats. They're tremendous to have in the house and great fun. But for some people, they can pose a serious health risk. Join me for tomorrow's Granada Tonight to find out how serious the consequences can be.
And that's all from us for now. Granada News will be back at 5 to 10 tomorrow morning.